an appearance on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, which has seen so many royal and national occasions in the past. A kiss, which receives a roar of approval from the crowd, who call the couple back and back again onto the balcony. It's hard to argue with 500,000 people who know what they want. And every single one was rewarded by this tender kiss.
Diana has been injured gravely. It's been reported, allegedly.
Not allegedly. They had pictures. We're watching it on
Allegedly.
We're watching it on CNN.
There's a huge accident. It's alleged.
It happened 2 hours
Cover my
ago.
bases. I cannot afford a lawsuit. It's changed. Princess Diana seriously injured.
Oh.
They've added the word seriously.
That's not good.
That's not good.
In other words, her face got it.
Dodi Al-Fayed is dead, as was the driver from the Ritz in the Mercedes, but her chauffeur was also injured.
Oof.
No, her
The
bodyguard
bodyguard was injured.
What
The
did I
chauffeur
say?
was. You said the chauffeur
The
was
chauffeur
injured.
was killed.
That's why I'm not on CNN, and they are.
Photographed car.
What adventure of life.
Roadside assistance.
With loader towing.
Gosh, it is.
Princess Diana dead.
Oh, she died.
Where's the remote?
Oh my God.
Oh, she didn't make it. Oh.
Just use the volume. Get it loud.
Why can't? It's the damn thing.
Within the briefing room where you're gathered, how did you find out who told you?
I was told. In fact, I had to step out because it's still going on. We were told by a hospital employee making a public statement, and now the French Interior Minister, Jean-Pierre Chevènement, is speaking and expressing his condolences. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Now, I'm going to have to go back in the briefing room, and I cannot speak up. They don't have the microphone.
Her chilling prediction reads, "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. Someone, the name blacked out, is planning an accident in my car, brake failure and serious head injuries."
This is from Diana, in her own words, 10 months before she died.
Elle dit pas j'ai rêvé, elle dit pas je pense, elle dit on m'a prévenu. On veut me faire assassiner dans un accident de voiture. Ce qui est arrivé. Ou alors elle avait des dons de divination extraordinaires.
It was a complete game changer.
Hello, my name is Ryan, and you are listening to the CrimeCast. In this show, we will be talking about true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and cryptid creatures from all over the world, from the mountains of the Himalayas to the suburbs of Los Angeles. And in our 8th episode, we will be talking about the tragic death of Princess Diana, the timeline of the events before and after her death, and looking into some of the theories that have popped up after her death. I do want to say that, once again, I'm changing up the intro, and I put in some news clips of Diana while she was the Princess of Wales, and some very famous news clips, of course, of her. But besides that, let's get into Diana's early life. Early life. Diana born as Diana Frances Spencer, was born on July 1st, 1961 in Sandringham, Norfolk at Park House. Diana, even though she would work as a teacher's assistant, was born into the British nobility as a Spencer and grew up close to the royal family's Sandringham estate. Very sorry if any names or locations are mispronounced during this episode. I always try to not say that in every episode, but it seems like every episode there are very complicated names and locations, so I'm very sorry. Diana was the fourth child out of 5 born to John and Frances Spencer, known at the time as Lord Altroff and Lady Altroff, and that's who they'll be referred to for the remainder of the podcast. Within her family, Diana was known as Dutch due to her Duchess-like attitude in childhood. Due to already having 2 older sisters, with her older brother dying shortly after his birth, Diana's parents' desire for her hair started to strain their relationship, causing them to divorce when Diana was 7 years old. And actually, this kind of affected Diana's childhood as well, but I will get into that later on. Due to renting Park House, located on the Sandringham estate, from Queen Elizabeth II, and also being neighbors with the Windsors, and of course going to Sandringham House for holidays, Diana would start calling Queen Elizabeth II and Lilibet, and also played with the Queen's 2 younger sons, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward. And even, I do believe that she played with the older 2 as well, but I'm not 100% sure about that. As stated earlier, when Diana was 7, her parents divorced. During the separation period, Diana moved to London with Lady Altroff, who would form a relationship and later marry Peter Keed. But during Christmas of 1967, Diana's father, Lord Altroff, refused to allow his daughters to return to London with their mother. Soon after, with the support from his former mother-in-law, Lady Fermon, Lord Altroff would win custody of Diana and her 2 older sisters. And I believe this kind of had an effect on Diana because she just lived with her father for most of her childhood at this point. And life with her father was very hard on her. After winning custody of his daughters, Lord Altroff would marry Renee McCorkle in 1976. And Diana called Renee a bully and resented her during her entire childhood. It is reported that on one occasion, Diana had pushed Renee down the stairs. Later in her life, Diana described her life in Diana, Her True Story, in her own words, which was one of her biographies that was written about her. She described her childhood as, quote, very unhappy, end quote, and also, quote, very unstable, the whole thing, end quote. So this just proves that she had a very hard upbringing. A year before marrying Renee, Diana's grandfather, Albert Spencer, who was the 7th Earl Spencer, died, naming Lord Altroff as the 8th Earl Spencer. Diana also would become known as Lady Diana, and the family moved from Park House to Altroff, located in West Northamptonshire, and is also the Spencer's main estate. This was Diana's first name change, title change really, during her life. So she went from just Diana to Lady Diana. Now, as I stated earlier, Diana grew up a common life. She had a very common lifestyle, so let's dive into that part of her life. It is stated this is what Diana's common lifestyle was like. During her time in school, Diana would show talent for music, becoming an accomplished pianist. She also excelled in both swimming and diving, and would study both ballet and tap dance. In 1978, Diana started her first nannying job, working for Philippa and Jeremy Whittaker for 3 months. But before working for the Whittakers, Diana went to a finishing school in Switzerland for only one term, and then would drop out, returning to London, where she lived in her mother's flat with 2 school friends. During her time in London, Diana took an advanced cooking course, but never really cooked for her friends. And she also would work a series of low-income jobs. These jobs included being a youth dance instructor until she was involved in a skiing accident, so even at a young age. Diana loved skiing, and that is shown in home videos of the royal family when they went on skiing trips. Diana would then become a playgroup preschool assistant, and she would also do cleaning for both her sister Sarah and her friends. Lastly, one of her jobs was hostess at parties. So she basically hosted a lot of parties, or helped host them. Lastly, she also nannied for an American family, the Robertsons, who were living in London, and became a nursery teacher assistant at the Young England School. So that was her last job before she became Princess Diana. From July 1979 to February 25th, 1981, Lady Altroff would buy Diana an apartment at Coleherne Court in Earl's Court, which is I think I've been to Earl's. Yeah, I did go to Earl's Court when I was in London, and man, that is beautiful architecture, really. As an 18th birthday present in July of 1979, Diana, alongside 3 flatmates, would live at the apartment until February 25th, 1981. Now you may be wondering, Ryan, why haven't you announced any relationship with Prince Charles? And, well, on February 25th, 1981, the engagement between Prince Charles and Diana would be officially announced to the public. But let's step back a bit and talk about the relationship Diana and Charles had before their marriage. Before moving out of her Coleherne apartment, it was announced that Lady Diana was engaged to the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles. Now, even though Diana had known / grew up with Charles a little bit, she wouldn't meet him officially, put it that way, until 1977. At the time, Charles was dating Diana's sister, Lady Sarah, and had come to visit the family at Altroff, but wouldn't take any interest in Diana until the mid-80s. During 1980, the Spencers were invited to a country weekend with the royals, in which Diana would see Charles playing his favorite sport, polo, and of course, as Charles saw Diana and would take interest in her and for her to possibly become his wife. This was later confirmed by Charles's biographer Jonathan Dimbleby, who said, quote, he would state in his book, quote, without any apparent surge of feeling, he began to think seriously of her as a potential bride, end quote. Later, Charles invited Diana for a sailing weekend aboard the which is the royal yacht. Prince Philip, and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, fell in love with Diana and accepted her as Charles's, girlfriend. February 3rd, 1981. 6 months after they started dating, Charles proposed to Diana at Windsor Castle. But the engagement wasn't official until February 24th, in which, during an interview, Diana showed off her engagement ring, which Diana actually had chosen herself, which is very weird, because normally when you get an engagement ring, you don't really choose it yourself, but you would have to get it resized later on. Anyways, and would move out of Collinhurst Court and move into Clarence House, which was home to the Queen Mother, and later moved to Buckingham Palace until the wedding. Now, the engagement period was actually a very important time because that's when there was a little bit of a weird encounter between Diana and Charles during an interview. According to peoplesmagazine.com, during an interview with the BBC at Buckingham Palace, shortly after their engagement was officialized, Charles said that he was, quote, delighted and frankly amazed, end quote, that Diana was prepared to take him on as her husband. Diana described Charles as, quote, pretty amazing, end quote. Now, during the same interview, a famous comment made by Charles would leave Diana, quote, traumatized, end quote. The couple had been asked if they were in love. Diana replied with a simple, quote, of course, end quote. But Charles had responded with, quote, whatever in love means, end quote. And here is that clip.
This was the day when Prince Charles, aged 32, announced his engagement to the 19-year-old Lady Diana Spencer, the kindergarten teacher, who up till now had been sharing a flat with friends. But when had Charles actually proposed?
Well, I asked Diana before she went to Australia, 2 or 3 days before, because I thought it'd be a good idea that, apart from anything else, if she went to Australia, she could then think about it, and if she didn't like the idea, she could say she didn't, or if she did, she could say that. But in fact, you actually said...
Yes, quite promptly. Well, it wasn't a difficult decision in the end. That's what I wanted. That's what I want.
It's a tremendous change for someone, if I may say, of 19 to make all of a sudden. Not back to the nursery and not back, not back to flat sharing, presumably.
No.
You sort of made a little grimace there, as if you rather liked flat sharing, and that is something.
No, I
you're
was
giving up.
referring to the children. We miss them.
You miss looking after the children.
Right.
Well, they certainly miss you, won't they?
I hope so. But I think anyone in the position we've been in would feel the pressure and everything. But it's been worthwhile, every bit of it. And next to Prince Charles, I know I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Yes.
Well, it
you can put your own interpretation.
Obviously means two very happy people.
Yes.
As you can see.
Well, from us, congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's very kind.
During her time at Buckingham Palace, according to her biographer Ingrid Seward, Diana was incredibly lonely because, she's in this humongous palace all by herself. Diana and Charles would make their first public appearance together in March of 1981 at a charity ball. So this was after the engagement was, finalized and made public. During a recording for her 1992 biography, Diana recalled discovering a bracelet that Charles bought for his longtime lover, Camilla Parker Bowles, shortly before their wedding. Due to her own suspicions, Diana was going to call off the wedding, but didn't after her sisters convinced her not to. Now, one of these suspicions happened after Diana was photographed in March of 1981, holding back tears at the airport. Diana later reveals that the reason she had been crying was because she had overheard and was left disturbed by a phone call between Charles and Camilla. Now, even though Diana was going to call off the wedding, a royal wedding would happen between Princess Diana and Prince Charles. A royal wedding. Lady Diana, 20, and Prince Charles, 32, got married on July 29th, 1981. This royal wedding would be called, quote, the wedding of the century, end quote, with over 100 million people watching the wedding on TV, 2 million people lining Diana's procession route, and the couple inviting around 3,500 guests to their wedding. And I will leave linked below some videos and some clips of the wedding. These clips are like an hour long. These are some official footage of it. Unlike previous and future royal weddings, Diana and Charles chose to have their wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral rather than at Westminster Abbey. During the wedding, Diana changed some of her vows during the ceremony. The first change was by accident. Instead of saying, quote, Charles, Philip, Arthur, George, end quote, Diana had said, quote, Philip, Charles, Arthur, George, end quote. So that may sound the same, but actually Diana had changed Charles's first name and one of his middle names. So she said Charles, instead of saying the Charles Philip, she put Philip before Charles. The next change was requested by the couple. Instead of saying she promised to obey Charles, Diana had said she did not promise to obey him at all. And I think this kind of proves some other things in their relationship. Anyways, Charles also made an error. Instead of offering Diana, quote, my worldly goods, end quote, he offered her, quote, thy goods, end quote. After their wedding, Diana acquired the title of Princess of Wales, making her the third highest ranked woman in the British royal family. So, just to give you a picture, the top of the royal family is Queen Elizabeth II. Next is the Queen Mother, and then it was Diana. So that's how it went. Also, this is Diana's second title change. She went from just Diana to Lady Diana to Diana, Princess of Wales. Now, after their wedding, Diana would start a new life as a princess and as an official member of the royal family. Diana's new life. The couple would reside at both Kensington Palace and Highgrove House during their marriage. Just around 4 months after their marriage, on November 5th, 1981, Diana's first pregnancy was announced. During the 12-week mark in January 1982, Diana had fallen down the stairs while at Sandringham Grab, in which she suffered some bruising. In one of Diana's secretly recorded tapes while at Kensington, she said how she felt so inadequate that she quote, I threw myself down the stairs, end quote. So this wasn't just some accident. Diana was really trying to kill herself or injure herself greatly. On June 21st, 1982, Diana gave birth to Prince William. Diana would then suffer from postpartum depression. 2 years later, their second son, Prince Harry, would be born on September 5th, 1984. During this pregnancy, Diana and Charles's relationship was the strongest it had been since they've married. Now that we know a little bit about the happy moments in Diana's new life, let's talk about the problems and later the divorce that Charles and Diana went through. 5 years after their wedding, the couple's incompatibility and the 12-year age gap became visible and damaging. Now also, I'm going to be giving some really big timelines and also very pinpoint some exact moments in the relationship, so if it gets really confusing, I'm very sorry. 1986, Diana began dating the family's former riding instructor James Hewitt. The media would begin speculating that Hewitt was Harry's father and not Charles. This was based on the physical similarities between Hewitt and Harry, but Hewitt and others have denied this. People also noted that Harry was born 2 years before Hewitt's and Diana's affair began. And even still, people believe that there are some very remarkable similarities between now grown-up Harry and Hewitt. So maybe they did have a little affair before the 2 years. In 1986, Charles would resume his relationship with former girlfriend Camilla Parker Bowles. She's been brought up again. You know, I should have like a tally marker in the corner of this video. How many times do I mention Camilla Parker Bowles? Yeah, I'm gonna do that. The next year, the crack in the couple's relationship becomes more visible, with the couple's unhappiness and cold attitude towards each other being reported by the press. The press had dubbed them, quote, the glums, end quote, due to the discomfort in one another's company. And this discomfort could also be seen during that famous engagement interview some years back. In 1989, while at a birthday party for Annabelle Elliott, Camilla's sister, another tally mark there, Diana confronted Camilla about her and Charles' affair. That's already 3 down. Oh my god. You know what? I'll actually talk about this at the end of the video while I'm editing and tell you how many there were. 1992. The affairs between Camilla and Charles would be exposed in Diana, Her True Story. The book also revealed Diana's suicidal unhappiness, which was kind of present during her pregnancy with William. 1991. James Colthurst conducted secret interviews with Diana, in which she talked about her maternal issues and difficulties. Later, these interviews would be used in both of Andrew Morton's books about Diana. By the way, Andrew Morton is Diana's biographer. During this time, the Queen and Prince Philip hosted a meeting between Charles and Diana. This meeting tried, unsuccessfully, to effect a recollection between the couple. Afterwards, Philip wrote to Diana, expressing his disappointment in the affairs and asked her to examine their behavior from others' point of view. Diana had found the letters hard to take, so she found this letter very hard to take in, and she was like, do I or do I not see how the public or other people are seeing our relationship? Anyways, in 1992 and 1993, leaked tapes of phone calls reflected negatively on both Charles and Diana. With the recordings and transcripts between Diana and James Ghibli, a British actor, being made public in August of 1992. This recording would be called the Squiddy Gate or Diana Gate. In November, tapes between Charles and Camilla were published. Their recordings would be called the Camilla Gate. Even though Diana blamed Camilla for her maternal troubles, she also believed that Charles had been involved in other affairs. In October 1993, Diana wrote to her butler, Paul Brillion, who for the rest of the podcast I'll be calling Butler Paul because that's a beautiful name, saying that she believed her husband was in love with his personal assistant, Tiggy Leggy Bork, who was also the boys' former nanny. By the way, the boys are referring to the sons, to Prince Harry and Prince William. Diana also believed he was planning to have her killed, Quote, she would say, quote, to make the path clear for him to marry Tiggy, end quote. This was all said to Diana's butler, by the way. Diana discussed both her and Charles's affair on the show Panorama, which also was made public, showing how difficult their relationship was. Diana would say during her interview that would later be broadcast on November 20th, 1995. Quote, well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded, end quote. And actually, if I can find it, here is that interview. Later, it was revealed that Diana was/had suffered from depression, bulimia, and also BPD, borderline personality disorder. This interview would prove to be the tipping point in their relationship. November 20th, 1995, Buckingham Palace announced the Queen sent letters to Charles and Diana advising them to divorce. Charles formally agreed to the divorce shortly afterwards. February 1996, Diana announced her agreement after negotiations with Charles and representatives of the Queen. This irritated Buckingham Palace since she issued her own announcement of the divorce agreements and its terms. So normally, Buckingham Palace announces when a child is born, when there's going to be a wedding, but Diana decided on her own to announce this. And this was kind of like the first time that she was breaking away from the royal family. July 1996, the couple agreed on terms of their divorce. Shortly afterwards, Diana accused that Tiggy Leggy Burke had had an abortion, and Diana believed that the child was Charles. By the way, this isn't really proven if it's kind of real or not, but that's just an accusation, nothing real. July 15th, 1996, the decreed NISI, which is basically a court order that will come into force at a future date unless a particular condition is met, was granted, and on August 28th, 1996, the divorce would be finalized. Diana would be represented by Anthony Julius, and Charles was represented by Fiona Scattleton. And this was what happened with terms of the divorce. The couple would have shared custody of the boys, with Diana receiving a lump sum settlement of £17 million and also $400,000 per year. The two would sign a confidentiality agreement that prohibited them from discussing the details of the divorce or their married life. Diana would lose the style, quote, Her Royal Highness, end quote. So basically what that means is when you introduce somebody, you go, Her Royal Highness, but she lost that, and instead was styled, quote, Diana, Princess of Wales, end quote. Due to being the mother of a prince expected to one day ascend the throne, she continued to be regarded as a member of the royal family and was acquired the same prestige since she enjoyed during her marriage. So basically she still had this enjoyment of a royal life kind of thing where you were treated as royal, but technically in terms of marriage you're not a part of the royal family. Reportedly the Queen wanted to let Diana to continue to use the style of Her Royal Highness after the divorce, but Charles insisted on it being removed. Prince Brillion was reported to have reassured his mother, quote, Don't worry, Mummy, I will give it back to you one day when I am king, end quote. A year before the divorce, according to English journalist Tina Brown, Prince Philip had warned Diana, quote, If you don't behave, my girl, we will take your title away, end quote. She also is said to have replied, quote, My title is a lot older than yours, Philip, end quote. So even before the divorce, Philip knew that this wasn't going to end pretty for anybody on both sides. After the divorce. Diana, after the divorce, would retain the double apartment on the north side of Kensington Palace, where she lived until her death. Diana moved her offices. These offices were used for her charity works, just to clarify that. to Kensington Palace, but was permitted, quote, to use the state apartment at St. James's Palace, end quote. The state apartment was used by the royals. It was revealed in a book published in 2003 that Butler Paul, they're bringing Butler Paul back, claimed that in his and Diana's private letters that Lord Spencer, Diana's brother, younger brother, refused to allow Diana to live at Altraff despite her request. So this is another sign that she wanted to move away from the royal family. During this time, Diana was given an allowance to run her private offices. But in September of 1996, Diana was requited to pay her bills, meaning she had to pay the bills. Diana was still allowed access to her jewelry that she received during her marriage. She also was allowed to use the air transport of the British royal family and government. These are some other perks she still retained from the divorce, just to state that she still was connected to the royal family in some ways. Diana was also offered security, which she benefited from while traveling with the boys. But in her final years, in an attempt to distance herself from the family, Diana would refuse this security. And many people bring up the fact that if Diana didn't refuse the security, she would still be alive to this day. And there's many factors of how Diana could still be alive today throughout her life, not just this one. Diana would date British Pakistani heart surgeon Rasnat Kanen, who was called, quote, the love of her life, end quote, by many of her close friends. And Diana described him as, quote, Mr. Wonderful, end quote. Their relationship would last 2 years. A month later, Diana begins her relationship with Dodi Fade, an Egyptian film producer. Now let's talk about the death of Diana. August 31st, 1997, Diana and Dodi, alongside their driver, Henry Paul, would die in the Pont de la Mare tunnel in Paris, France. I 100% butchered that name, and I'm very sorry. Saturday, August 30th, 1997, the day before, Diana arrived at the Le Bourget airport in Paris with her boyfriend Dodi Fade. The two were en route to London, but decided to stay at night in Paris at the Hotel Ritz Paris, which was owned by Dodi's father, Mohammed Aled Fade. Diana and Dodi were going to stay at an apartment just off of the Avenue des Champs-Élysées. That is so butchering it, I'm very sorry. Henry Paul, who was actually the deputy head of security at the Ritz, was instructed to drive the haired black 1994 Mercedes-Benz S280 sedan. Now, this vehicle was also armed and bulletproof, just to let you guys know that if anyone did try to take shots at Diana, they would have reflected. Before they left the hotel, a decoy vehicle left the Ritz first from the main entrance of the hotel to try to elude the paparazzi. In the end, this did not work. Diana and Dodi left from the hotel's back entrance at around 12:20 a.m. on August 31st. In the car was Henry Paul, the driver. Next to him was Trevor Rees-Jones, a member of the Fade family's personal protection team. On the right front passenger seat, seated behind the two of them, was Diana and Dodi. None of the occupants were wearing seatbelts. And this, of course, could have been why many of them did sustain those injuries that we'll talk about later. 3 minutes later, at 12:23, right when they got to the entrance of the tunnel, Paul lost control of the car. It's reported that they struck a passing white Fiat, causing them to swerve into the left of the two-lane carriageway and then collide head-on with the 13th pillar that supported the roof. The car then spun out of control, hitting the stone wall of the tunnel backwards and finally coming to a stop. The impact that had caused substantial damage, particularly to the front half of the vehicle, due to there being no guardrail that could have prevented this damage. Now, for any car statistic people or math statistic people out there, it's estimated that the car was traveling at around 105 kilometers per hour, I believe that is, or 65 miles per hour, which was around twice the 15 kilometer per hour speed limit, or 31 miles per hour speed limit of the tunnel. Witnesses who had seen the crash and arrived shortly after reported smoke coming up from the vehicle. They also reported that the photographers on motorcycles, quote, swarmed the Mercedes sedan before it entered the tunnel, end quote. Now let's get into the aftermath of what happened. Aftermath. Paparazzi had actually been driving much slower and were some distance behind the Mercedes, but would reach the scene with some rushing to help and others taking photos. So this kind of contradicts what many people believe the paparazzi did once they reached the vehicle. And that contradiction is that all the photographers there were taking photos of Diana, but this kind of alludes to it that some seeing that the Princess of Wales was in critical conditions. They ditched their main job that earns them money and focused on helping her. Police would arrive 10 minutes after the crash at 12:30, and an ambulance would arrive 5 minutes later. Now, this is very compelling when I first learned about this. According to the France Info Radio would report that one photographer was beaten by witnesses, 5 photographers were arrested directly, later on 2 would be detained, and around 20 rolls of film had been taken directly from the photographers. Police also impounded their vehicles, and I find that very shocking that the police were like, okay, everybody, get out of here, you're gonna get arrested. Anyways, Trevor, the bodyguard, sustained multiple serious face injuries and a head concussion, but was still conscious when the ambulance and police arrived. He was also the only survivor. Diana, who was sitting in the right rear passenger seat, was critically injured, but was also still conscious when ambulance and police arrived. The crash had mostly affected the right-hand side of her body, indicating that she was sitting sideways in her seat at the time of impact. Diana's ribs and arms were fractured, with her right collarbone being dislocated, and she also was suffering from swelling and bruising to the brain. Now, it was reported that Diana was murmuring repeatedly, quote, "Oh my God," unquote, after photographers and others were pushed out of the way by police. Diana said, quote, "Leave me alone," end quote. So this just proved that the photographers were ruining her life. June 2007, Channel 4, which is a British free-to-air public broadcast television channel, would release a document called Diana the Witness in the Tunnel, and they would claim that the first person to touch Diana after the crash was Frederick Militzi, who was an off-duty physician. That's just a report, we don't actually know. But it is reported that Diana was extremely disturbed and had removed an extractivance drip, which is basically like getting her fluids from herself, and she was shouting incoherently. So she was really messed up from this crash. At 1:00 a.m., it's about 30 minutes after police and ambulance arrived, Diana was removed from the car, and she had to be sedated because of her being just so out of it. And once removed from the car, she would go into cardiac arrest. But thankfully, after receiving CPR, Diana's heart would begin beating again. 18 minutes later, at 1:18, a.m. after being removed from this car, Diana would be removed to the ambulance. 23 minutes later, at around 1:41 a.m., after being brought to the ambulance, it finally left the scene. But get this, 25 minutes later, the ambulance would arrive at Pieta Salpetron Hospital at 2:06 a.m. So it's been around an hour and 30 minutes since the initial crash, and Diana has finally been brought to the hospital. And this goes with the theories that maybe somebody on the outside, not the photographers, not, Henry Paul, the driver, had something to do with her death because of how long it took for her, first off, to be put into the ambulance, to be taken out of the car, to even leave the scene, and to even get to the hospital. But none of this could be proven, and I will not be talking about those theories. Dodie, who was in the left rear passenger seat, would be pronounced dead at the scene. Then, after being removed from the wreckage, the driver, Henry Paul, had been pronounced dead as well. Now, this will go into our theory later, but it was later found that Paul's blood alcohol level was around 3.5 times the legal limit in France, but we'll get into that later on. And let's get back into Diana's injuries. Diana's injuries were so extensive, and due to CPR attempts being unsuccessful, so when she got to the hospital, she had to receive CPR again. Diana's heart had also been displaced to the right side of her chest, which was probably why CPR attempts had been unsuccessful. And this would tear her upper left pulmonary vein and the precaterum. Just some medical terms for any medical people out there who are into that stuff. Anyways, Diana would die at 3 a.m., just around 2 hours or so after the crash. Her death wouldn't be announced until 3 hours later at 6 a.m. when anesthesiologist Bruno Rio announced her death at a news conference held at the hospital. By 5 o'clock p.m., Prince Charles, along with Diana's sisters, Lady Sarah McColden and Lady Jane Fellows, arrived in Paris to bring Diana's body back to London for, of course, the funeral. Right away, the mourning period started for Lady Diana. It's reported that 1 million bouquets of flowers were left at her London residence. Her family estate, Altref, had actually asked the public to stop bringing flowers due to the volume of both visitors and flowers, and in the surrounding roads being a public safety hazard. September 10th, the flowers outside Kensington Gardens had reached about 5 feet deep in some places, with mourners being quiet and queuing patiently to sign a book of condolences at St. James's Palace. So people were it just showed how much people loved Diana and why she would later be called the People's Princess. Now let's talk about Diana's funeral. The death of Princess Diana was met with extraordinary public expression of grief. During her funeral on September 6th, an estimated 3 million mourners and onlookers came to London. The funeral was estimated to have around 3.5 million viewers in Britain and around 2.5 billion worldwide listeners, with the ceremony being broadcast in around 44 different languages. In a private ceremony, Diana would be buried on a private island in the middle of the Oval, a lake which is a part of the pleasure garden at Altref. And and during the public funeral, that's where we got the famous video of Prince Harry and his brother mourning the death of their mother, which, just out of respect, I think it was very wrong for the cameras, just for the boys to even be there. I will not be showing that footage because I just think it's just like kind of disrespectful, but I understand you're part of the royal family here to have this public broadcasting, but just out of the respect for the boys, I will not be showing that footage. Now let's get into the main theories of Diana's death. Theory 1, Henry Paul was drunk. By the way, I'll leave a link to the website where I got these two theories from. The allegation is that Henry Paul was described as drunk before they left the Riz that night. During the investigation period, Paul's alcohol level was around 3.5 times the legal limit, but according to British legal limit, Paul was only 2 times the legal limit. It's believed that maybe Paul's blood sample wasn't his. I'm not 100% sure on that, but clinical pharmacologist Professor Alfred Johnson would tell investigators that one of the blood samples was probably not Paul's, even though other experts disagree on this. According to The Sun, though, during a 2008 inquest into Diana's death, bartenders at the hotel said how Paul was drunk and had been hours before the crash, quote, walking like a clown, end quote. CCTV images contradict this and show no evidence of Paul's drunken behavior. Paul allegedly even said to paparazzi, quote, "You won't be able to catch up," end quote. So there's kind of there's just so much back and forth there. But theory 2 is that the paparazzi were involved. The allegation is that due to Diana's constantly being hounded and chased by the paparazzi right up until the moment she died, which is true. But during the investigation, neither the French or English investigators found a criminal conspiracy in regards to the paparazzi. France would fine each paparazzi €1 or $1 for invasion of Diana's privacy. Rumors persisted about a paparazzi conspiracy, most specifically James Anderson, and it's believed that James had helped with Diana's death. By the way, James is the famous paparazzi that photographs Diana. But to this day, to this day, just 21 days as of this recording, until King Charles's coronation, many questions are still being asked about the death of Princess Diana. Was it because their driver was drunk? Did the paparazzi chase her to her death? In the end, the royals say that Diana's cause of death was a car accident and was both Henry Paul's drunk driving and the paparazzi chasing her car. And that was the Princess Diana episode. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye!